The keycard beeped red for the 7th time, and Victoria Chen pressed her forehead against the cool metal of door 1247, her Hermes heels clicking in impatient rhythm against the worn hotel carpet. Rain hammered against the hallway windows with the fury of a February storm that had turned downtown Portland into a maze of flooded streets and stranded travelers. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from her assistant, 12 from her board of directors, and 1 from her ex-husband's lawyer that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Creating and narrating this type of story requires significant time and effort. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. "Come on," she whispered, swiping the card again with the desperate precision of someone who had built a tech empire on the belief that persistence could overcome any obstacle. The red light blinked back at her like a judgmental eye, and somewhere behind her she heard the soft ding of an elevator opening. Inside room 1247, Marcus Rivera was trying to explain to his 8-year-old daughter why sometimes grown-ups made promises they couldn't keep, even when those grown-ups happened to be judges who were supposed to make everything fair. Sofia sat cross-legged on one of the 2 double beds, her dark hair still damp from their earlier walk through Pioneer Courthouse Square, her small hands folding and refolding the custody papers that had arrived via courier just an hour ago. "Papa, does this mean Mama gets to keep me forever now?" Sofia's voice carried the particular weight that children's voices hold when they're trying to sound brave about something that terrifies them. Her stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, sat propped against the headboard, one ear more chewed than the other from 8 years of being the repository for all of Sofia's fears and secrets. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his carpenter's hands, scarred from years of building other people's dreams, trembling slightly as he reached for his daughter. The court documents might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the sense they made to him, but the bottom line was clear enough. Supervised visitation only, pending a full custody review. His ex-wife's new husband, with his law degree and his 7-figure salary, had painted Marcus as unstable, unreliable, a man whose love couldn't compensate for his lack of financial security. "Mija, we're going to figure this out," he said, pulling her close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Sometimes life gets complicated, but that doesn't change how much I love you, okay?" The sound of someone struggling with a keycard in the hallway barely registered until it became impossible to ignore. Beep, pause, beep, pause. Sofia looked up at her father with curious brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother, it still took his breath away sometimes. "Someone's having trouble," Sofia observed with the matter-of-fact wisdom of a child who had learned to pay attention to the small details that adults often missed. She slipped off the bed and padded to the door, her bare feet silent on the hotel carpet. "Papa, there's a lady out there, and she looks really sad." Marcus joined his daughter at the peephole, expecting to see another stranded traveler, maybe someone from one of the conferences that seemed to fill downtown hotels like this one every week. Instead, he saw a woman in an expensive-looking coat, her black hair pulled back in a bun that had started to come undone, pressing her forehead against the door across the hall. Even through the distorted lens of the peephole, he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like someone carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear. "She's trying to get into 1248, Sofia whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make the woman's situation worse. "Should we help her?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his sister Elena's number, and he knew without answering that she was calling about the custody papers. Elena had always been the family's unofficial crisis manager, the one who knew exactly which forms to fill out and which offices to call when life decided to test the Rivera family's resilience once again. "Go ahead and help her, Mija," Marcus said, ruffling Sofia's hair. "I'll be right there." Sofia opened the door with the confidence of a child who had been taught to trust her instincts about people, stepping into the hallway in her Pokemon pajamas and fuzzy socks. The woman, Victoria, looked up with startled blue eyes that were rimmed red with exhaustion and something that looked like barely contained panic. "Hi," Sofia said, tilting her head with curious sympathy. "Are you locked out?" Victoria blinked, taking in the sight of this small girl with her grave expression and her gentle smile. Something about the child's presence cut through the fog of stress that had been clouding Victoria's thoughts since her flight had been delayed, since her board meeting had been moved up, since her entire carefully constructed world had started showing cracks she couldn't seem to repair. Yes, Victoria said, her voice hoarse from hours of phone calls and barely contained frustration. The key card isn't working, and the front desk isn't answering, and… She trailed off, realizing she was sharing her problems with a child she'd never met. Standing in a hotel hallway at 10 o'clock at night while rain continued to pound against the windows like nature's own percussion section. "Papa," Sofia called over her shoulder. "She needs help." Marcus appeared in the doorway, phone still pressed to his ear, and Victoria found herself looking up, way up, at a man with kind eyes and calloused hands who was clearly in the middle of his own crisis, but had stopped everything to see if he could help a stranger. He held up one finger, finishing his conversation with quick, apologetic Spanish that sounded like someone trying to manage multiple emergencies at once. "Elena, I have to go," he said. "Yes, I got the papers. Yes, I'm going to call the lawyer in the morning. Give Mama my love." He hung up and focused on Victoria with the kind of attention that made her realize how long it had been since someone had really looked at her. Not at her title, or her net worth, or her potential usefulness, but at her. "Keycard trouble?" he asked, and his voice carried a warmth that seemed to cut through the fluorescent coldness of the hotel hallway. Victoria held up the offending piece of plastic, which suddenly seemed like a symbol of every system that had failed her in the past 24 hours. "It won't work, and I can't reach anyone at the front desk, and I have calls I need to make, and…" She stopped herself again, acutely aware that she was oversharing with strangers who had their own problems to worry about. Sofia looked up at her father with an expression that Victoria would later recognize as the look of a child who had made a decision that the adults in her life would simply have to accept. "Papa, she could use our phone. Or maybe she needs to sit down for a minute." Marcus studied Victoria's face, taking in the expensive clothes that couldn't hide the exhaustion, the perfectly applied makeup that had started to smudge around her eyes, the way she held herself like someone who was used to being in control but had temporarily lost her grip on the steering wheel of her own life. "Would you like to come in and try calling from our room?" he offered. "The phone service seems better inside than out in the hallway." Victoria's first instinct was to decline, to maintain the professional distance that had served her well in boardrooms and negotiations. But something about the way this man offered help, without expecting anything in return, without seeming to recognize her from the business magazines or tech blogs, made her pause. And Sofia was looking at her with such uncomplicated kindness that Victoria felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "I don't want to impose," she said, but even as she spoke the words, she was already stepping toward their open door, drawn by the warmth that seemed to radiate from this unlikely father-daughter duo. "No imposition," Marcus said, and Sofia nodded enthusiastically, taking Victoria's hand with the easy trust of a child who had been raised to believe that most people were fundamentally good, even when life sometimes suggested otherwise. As Victoria stepped into room 1247, she noticed details that her business-focused mind usually filtered out: the custody papers scattered across one bed, the stuffed elephant with its well-loved fur, the way Marcus moved around the small space with the careful efficiency of a single parent who had learned to make any environment feel like home for his daughter. The room smelled like the strawberry shampoo Sofia had used and something else, maybe cedar and sawdust, scents that clung to Marcus's clothes and spoke of work done with his hands, of building things that would last. "I'm Victoria," she said, realizing that in all her frustration with the keycard, she had forgotten the basic courtesy of introductions. "Marcus," he replied, gesturing toward the chairs by the small table near the window. "And this is Sofia." "I'm 8, Sofia added helpfully, settling onto one of the beds with Mr. Peanuts. "Are you here for business or vacation?" The innocent question hit Victoria with unexpected force. When was the last time she had taken a vacation? When was the last time she had done anything that wasn't related to quarterly earnings or market expansion, or the constant, grinding pressure of proving that a woman could run a tech company just as well as any man? "Business," she said, accepting the chair Marcus offered. "I have a board meeting in the morning, and my flight was delayed, and everything just seems to be." She gestured helplessly, and Sofia nodded with the sage understanding of someone who had learned that adults often struggled to find words for the things that mattered most. Marcus handed her the room's cordless phone, and as their fingers brushed during the transfer, Victoria felt a spark of something she couldn't quite identify. Not attraction exactly, though there was something undeniably appealing about his quiet strength, but more like recognition. As if some part of her that had been holding its breath for years suddenly remembered how to exhale. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and Victoria realized that whatever happened next, This night was going to be different from any she had planned. She dialed the front desk, listening to the phone ring endlessly while Sofia chattered softly to her stuffed elephant, and Marcus began gathering the legal papers that told their own story of systems failing the people who needed them most. When no one answered the hotel phone, Victoria found herself looking at this man and his daughter, at the way they moved around each other with practiced affection, at the way Marcus listened to Sofia with the kind of attention that made it clear she was the most important person in his world. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Chen, CEO, board member, master of controlled environments, had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. Victoria tried 3 more numbers, the hotel's main line, her assistant's emergency contact, and finally her driver's cell phone, before accepting that the storm had effectively cut her off from the carefully orchestrated world she had built around herself. Each unanswered call felt like another thread snapping in the web of control she had spent 15 years weaving, thread by painstaking thread. "The whole city's pretty much shut down," Marcus said gently, noticing her increasing frustration. He had moved to the window, watching the way the wind bent the street signs and sent debris skittering down the empty streets. "We were supposed to be back home in Salem tonight, but they closed Highway 22 about an hour ago." Sofia looked up from where she was arranging Mr. Peanuts into what appeared to be a very serious conversation with the hotel's promotional materials. "Papa had to carry me from the parking garage because the water was so deep. My shoes got all squishy." "You didn't have to carry her through floodwater," Victoria said, something sharp and protective rising in her chest before she could stop it. She recognized the tone. It was the same one she used in board meetings when someone suggested a plan that put employees at unnecessary risk. The hotel should have provided transportation, or... Marcus turned from the window with a small smile that held no defensiveness, only mild amusement at her concern for strangers. "Sofia's fine. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for, and I've carried her through worse than a little rain." "A little rain?" Victoria gestured toward the window where lightning was turning the sky into a strobe light. "This is a major weather event. The economic impact alone must be..." She stopped herself, recognizing the way her mind automatically shifted into analytical mode when faced with situations she couldn't control. It was a habit that had served her well in business but had contributed to the end of her marriage, according to her ex-husband's lawyer. Too focused on systems and profits, not enough on people and feelings. Too much CEO, not enough wife. Sofia had been watching this exchange with the keen interest of a child who spent a lot of time observing adult behavior. "Do you have kids?" she asked Victoria with characteristic directness. The question landed like a physical blow. Victoria's hands clenched involuntarily, and she found herself staring at her diamond engagement ring. The one she still wore, even though the engagement had ended 2 years ago, even though James had made it clear that her inability to prioritize family over work made her unsuitable for marriage, unsuitable for motherhood. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." "That's okay," Sofia said with 8-year-old wisdom. "Papa says some people are meant to love lots of people instead of just a few people, and that's good too." Marcus shot his daughter a look that was equal parts pride and gentle warning, but Victoria found herself studying his face with new attention. There was a story there, in the way he had spoken about Sofia's mother in past tense, in the custody papers that suggested someone was questioning his fitness as a parent, in the careful way he navigated conversations about family structures that didn't fit traditional molds. "Sofia, why don't you get ready for bed while Ms. Victoria and I figure out what to do about her room situation?" Marcus suggested, and Sofia nodded, gathering Mr. Peanuts and disappearing into the bathroom with the practiced efficiency of a child used to hotel rooms and uncertain schedules. With his daughter occupied, Marcus's demeanor shifted subtly. The protective father remained, but Victoria could see glimpses of the man underneath. Someone who had learned to carry heavy loads without complaining. Someone who had been tested by circumstances beyond his control and had chosen to meet those tests with grace rather than bitterness. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said, surprising herself with the question. She was not someone who typically indulged in personal conversations with strangers. But something about this night, this storm, this strange sanctuary, had loosened her usual professional restraints. "Sure. Why did you help me? You don't know me, you clearly have your own problems to deal with, and yet you opened your door to a complete stranger." She gestured around the room, taking in the legal papers, the evidence of their interrupted evening. Most people would have pretended not to hear the keycard situation. Marcus considered the question with the same thoughtful attention he had been giving her all evening. When I was Sofia's age, my family got evicted from our apartment. We spent 3 weeks living in my uncle's truck while my parents tried to find a new place. People helped us. Strangers who had no reason to care about one more family having a hard time. A motel clerk who looked the other way when we used the bathroom to clean up. A restaurant owner who hired my mom even though she had no experience. A teacher who made sure I had school supplies even when we couldn't afford them. He sat down across from Victoria, and she could see in his expression the echoes of that 8-year-old boy who had learned early that kindness was often the difference between surviving and thriving. I guess I learned that when someone needs help, you help if you can. It's not complicated. It is for most people, Victoria said, thinking of the board meetings where every decision was filtered through risk assessments and liability concerns, where helping someone always came with calculations about potential downside. In my world, nothing comes without strings attached. What world is that? Victoria hesitated. She had built her identity around her professional success for so long that she barely knew how to describe herself without the corporate titles and achievement metrics. I run a tech company. Software development, mostly for financial institutions. We employ about 800 people across 4 cities. Marcus nodded, but she could tell the information didn't change how he saw her, didn't make her more or less worthy of help. It was refreshing and unsettling in equal measure. That sounds like a lot of responsibility, he said. No wonder you seem stressed about missing those calls. The board meeting tomorrow, today, now, I guess, could determine the entire future of the company. We're facing a hostile takeover attempt, and I need to present a counter-strategy that proves we can maintain our growth trajectory while preserving our company culture. Victoria realized she was explaining more than necessary, but something about Marcus's attentive silence invited elaboration. 15 years I've been building this company, trying to prove that we could do things differently, treat employees like people instead of resources. And now, some investment group thinks they can do it better by cutting costs and maximizing shareholder value. Sofia emerged from the bathroom in fresh pajamas, her teeth brushed, and her hair in a neat braid that spoke of practiced bedtime routines. She climbed onto the bed with her legal papers and custody documents, settling Mr. Peanuts beside her with solemn ceremony. "Papa, is Victoria going to sleep on the floor?" Sofia asked, "because that doesn't seem very nice." Victoria started to protest that she would figure something out, maybe sleep in the lobby or find another hotel, but Marcus was already shaking his head. "There's 2 beds," he said simply. "You're welcome to one of them. Storm like this, you're not going anywhere tonight anyway." "I couldn't possibly impose like that," Victoria began, but Sofia was already patting the bed beside her. "You could share with me," she offered. "Mr. Peanuts doesn't take up much room, and I don't snore. Papa snores sometimes, but only when he's really tired." "Sofia," Marcus said with gentle embarrassment, but he was smiling. Victoria looked between father and daughter, at their easy generosity, at the way they had absorbed a stranger into their evening without drama or expectation of reciprocation. When was the last time someone had offered her something without wanting something in return? When was the last time she had been in a room where the only agenda was simple human kindness? "Are you sure?" she asked Marcus. "I know this isn't. I mean, you have your own situation to deal with." Marcus glanced at the custody papers, and Victoria saw a shadow cross his features. "Actually, having someone else to talk to might be good. Sofia's been worried about these court documents, and maybe having a distraction will help us both." Sofia looked between the adults with the particular satisfaction of a child who had engineered a situation that pleased everyone involved. "Victoria, do you want to see Mr. Peanuts' trick?" Before Victoria could respond, Sofia had positioned the stuffed elephant on its hind legs and was making it perform what appeared to be an elaborate dance routine, complete with sound effects and running commentary about Mr. Peanuts' career as a circus performer. The absurdity of it. Victoria Chen, CEO and corporate strategist, sitting in a budget hotel room watching a stuffed animal performance while a storm raged outside, struck her with such force that she began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle but grew into something deeper, more genuine than any laughter she had experienced in months. Sofia beamed with the pride of a successful entertainer, and Marcus watched Victoria with something that might have been surprise at the transformation that laughter brought to her features. "He's very talented," Victoria managed, wiping tears from her eyes. "Does he have an agent?" "Papa's working on it," Sofia said solemnly, settling back against her pillows. "But first we have to figure out the custody thing." The mood in the room shifted, and Victoria could see Marcus's protective instincts kick in, the way he moved slightly closer to his daughter, as if he could shield her from the implications of those legal documents just by proximity. "Sofia, we don't need to worry Ms. Victoria with our family business," he said gently. "But she's good at business," Sofia pointed out with impeccable logic. "Maybe she knows about legal stuff." Victoria found herself looking at the papers scattered across the bed with professional interest, her mind automatically shifting into problem-solving mode. "If you don't mind me asking, what kind of custody issue are you dealing with?" Marcus hesitated, and Victoria could see the internal debate playing out across his features. The desire to protect his daughter's privacy warring with what looked like desperate hope that someone might understand, might have insight that could help. "My ex-wife remarried," he said finally. "Her new husband is a lawyer, and he's convinced her that Sofia would be better off with them full-time. They've filed for sole custody, claiming I'm financially unstable because I work construction instead of having a desk job." Victoria picked up one of the legal documents, scanning the formal language that she recognized from her own business dealings. "This is a motion for supervised visitation pending a full custody hearing?" "Yeah. They're arguing that because I can't provide the same financial stability as a two-lawyer household, Sofia shouldn't be with me unsupervised. Never mind that she's been happy and healthy and loved for 8 years. The anger in Marcus's voice was carefully controlled, tempered by his awareness of Sofia's presence, but Victoria could hear the pain underneath. She had seen similar dynamics in her business world, people with resources using those resources to steamroll people without them, systems that favored wealth and status over character and dedication. "What does Sofia want?" Victoria asked, looking at the little girl who was pretending to be absorbed in arranging Mr. Peanuts but was clearly listening to every word. "I want to live with Papa," Sofia said immediately, her young voice carrying surprising strength. "I love Mama too, but she's different now. She says I need to learn to be more proper. And Derek, that's her new husband. He doesn't like it when I play loud or when I talk too much at dinner." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had grown up in a household where children were expected to be seen and not heard, where emotional expression was treated as a character flaw to be corrected. It had served her well in the corporate world, but had cost her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Have you told the court what you want?" she asked Sofia directly. "They said I'm too little for my opinion to matter," Sofia replied, and the resignation in her voice was heartbreaking. Victoria looked at Marcus, who was watching his daughter with the expression of a man who would move mountains if it would keep his child from experiencing disappointment. "That's not necessarily true," she said carefully. "Courts are supposed to consider the best interests of the child, and an 8-year-old's preferences can be part of that evaluation." "The lawyer we consulted said the same thing," Marcus said. "But lawyers cost money we don't have, especially good ones who know how to fight against other lawyers." Victoria studied the legal documents with growing indignation. She recognized the tactics being used, overwhelming the opposition with paperwork and procedural complexity, using financial advantage to create an uneven playing field. It was the kind of bullying she had faced in her early days as a CEO, when male competitors had tried to use their established networks and deeper pockets to force her out of markets she had every right to compete in. "Can I make a suggestion?" she said, and something in her tone made both Marcus and Sofia pay attention. "I'm not a lawyer, but I've been in enough legal battles to recognize certain patterns. This motion for supervised visitation? It's designed to create a record that makes you look unstable. They're hoping you'll react emotionally, maybe violate the terms in some small way, and then they can point to that as evidence that you're unfit." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So what do I do?" "You document everything, every interaction with Sofia, every phone call with your ex-wife, every penny you spend on your daughter's care. You show the court that you're not just a loving father, but a responsible, engaged parent who puts his daughter's needs first." Victoria pulled out her phone and began typing notes. "And you get Sofia's voice heard, legally." There are ways to make sure the court understands her perspective without putting her through a traumatic custody evaluation. Sofia had moved closer during this conversation, settling beside Victoria with Mr. Peanuts in her lap. "You really think they'll listen to me?" Victoria looked into the child's dark eyes, seeing intelligence and resilience that reminded her uncomfortably of herself at that age. A little girl learning to navigate adult systems that seemed designed to discount her worth. "I think anyone who spends 5 minutes with you would know exactly where you belong," she said. Sometimes the challenge is making sure the right people get those 5 minutes. As the storm continued to rage outside, Victoria found herself thinking about systems and fairness, about the ways that money and status could be used as weapons against people who were guilty of nothing more than loving deeply and living authentically. She thought about her own board meeting, just hours away, where she would be fighting a different kind of custody battle for the company she had built, the employees she considered family. "Marcus," she said suddenly, "what kind of construction work do you do?" "Custom carpentry mostly, built-ins, renovation work, some residential design. I used to work for a big company, but I went freelance when Sofia was born, so I could have more flexible hours." "You gave up job security to be more available for your daughter?" "Of course," Marcus said, as if the choice had been obvious. "What good is financial security if you miss your kid growing up?" Victoria nodded slowly, understanding something about this man that the court documents had missed entirely. Marcus Rivera wasn't financially unstable because he was irresponsible or lazy. He was financially vulnerable because he had made his daughter's needs the organizing principle of his life, choosing flexibility over security, presence over profit. Outside, thunder rolled across the city with the sound of something large and important shifting into a new position. Victoria looked around the hotel room that had become an unexpected refuge, at the father and daughter who had welcomed her without question, at the legal papers that told a story of systems failing the people who needed them most. And for the first time in years, she felt the stirring of something that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market share. A sense of purpose that was bigger than her own success, more important than her own carefully constructed plans. "I want to help," she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "With the custody case, I want to help you fight this." Marcus stared at her, and Sofia looked up from Mr. Peanuts with eyes that were suddenly bright with hope and something that looked like the beginning of trust. Victoria's offer hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus found himself studying her face for signs of the kind of empty charity he had encountered before. Well-meaning strangers who made grand gestures in moments of emotion only to disappear when the reality of sustained commitment set in. But there was something different in Victoria's expression, a quality of determination that suggested she was not someone who made promises lightly. "You don't even know us," Marcus said carefully. "This isn't your problem to solve." "Maybe not," Victoria replied, closing her laptop and giving him her full attention. "But I know what it looks like when systems are designed to favor people with resources over people with principles. And I've never been able to walk away from a fight when the outcome matters." Sofia had been listening with the focused attention of a child who had learned that adult conversations often determined the shape of her world. "Are you really going to help us beat Derek?" "Derek isn't your enemy, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, though Victoria could hear the effort it took to keep his voice neutral. He thinks he knows what's best for you." "He told Mama that you're not economically viable as a father figure," Sofia said, and the careful way she pronounced the words suggested she had been practicing them, trying to understand their meaning. "What does that mean?" Victoria felt heat rise in her chest. She had heard similar language in boardrooms, the cold reduction of human worth to economic metrics, the way that love and dedication could be dismissed if they didn't translate to impressive financial statements. "It means some people think money is more important than love," she said, meeting Marcus's eyes. "They're wrong." Her phone buzzed with another call from her assistant, and Victoria looked at the screen with something approaching dread. The board meeting was in 8 hours, and she had spent the evening in a hotel room with strangers instead of preparing her presentation, instead of marshaling the arguments that might save her company. But as she looked at Sofia's hopeful expression and Marcus's careful vulnerability, she realized that some battles were more important than quarterly projections. "I need to handle this," she said, gesturing to her phone. "But I meant what I said about helping. We can talk more in the morning." She stepped into the hallway to take the call, leaving Marcus and Sofia to their bedtime routine. The storm had intensified, turning the hotel corridor into a tunnel of sound. Rain against windows, wind howling around corners, the distant rumble of thunder that suggested the worst was still coming. "Sarah, I know you've been calling," Victoria said before her assistant could launch into the crisis update she had undoubtedly prepared. "What's the situation with the board meeting?" "Victoria, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The Meridian Group moved up their timeline. They're planning to announce their takeover bid at market open, which means we need to have our counterproposal ready for the emergency board session at 7 a.m. Victoria closed her eyes, doing rapid calculations in her head. 7 a.m. meant she had less than 8 hours to finalize a presentation that represented 15 years of work that would determine whether her company remained an independent entity committed to its values or became another acquisition in Meridian's portfolio of stripped-down, profit-maximized shells. "Have you sent the revised financial projections to the board members?" "Yes, but Victoria, there's something else." Meridian leaked their preliminary offer to the financial press. The stock price jumped 12% in after-hours trading, and now some of our own board members are asking whether we should consider the offer seriously. Victoria pressed her forehead against the cool wall, feeling the familiar weight of leadership settling on her shoulders like armor that no longer fit quite right. "Which board members?" "Patterson, obviously. And I think Richardson is wavering. He's been asking a lot of questions about our long-term sustainability, especially our commitment to maintaining current benefit levels and employment numbers." Through the door of room 1247, Victoria could hear Marcus reading to Sofia, something about a brave mouse who refused to let the larger animals in the forest intimidate her into giving up her home. The parallel was not lost on her. "Sarah, I need you to set up calls with Patterson and Richardson for 6 a.m. I want to speak with them individually before the full board meeting." "Victoria, where are you? The GPS on your phone shows you're still in Portland, but your meeting with the Portland development team was canceled because of the weather." Victoria looked around the empty hotel corridor, at the fluorescent lighting and worn carpet that bore no resemblance to the executive suites and boardrooms where she usually conducted business. "I'm at the Marriott downtown. Flight delays, you know how it is." "Do you need me to arrange alternate transportation?" "I could have a car service." "No," Victoria said, surprising herself with the firmness of her response. "I'll handle the calls from here and drive back in the morning when the roads are clear. Just make sure all the materials are ready and that everyone understands we're fighting for more than just market share." She ended the call and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the storm and thinking about different kinds of battles. Through the door, she could hear Sofia giggling at something in Marcus's story, and the sound was like a reminder of what was at stake in both of her fights. Not just money or legal victories, but the preservation of spaces where people could be valued for who they were rather than what they could produce. When she returned to the room, Sofia was tucked under the covers with Mr. Peanuts, and Marcus was gathering the legal documents from the bed. He looked up at Victoria with the expression of someone bracing for disappointment. "Business emergency?" he asked. "Something like that." Victoria sat down in the chair by the window, pulling out her laptop. "But not more important than this." She gestured toward the custody papers. "Can I look at these more carefully? I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Marcus hesitated, then handed over the documents. "We don't have money to pay you for legal advice, if that's what you're thinking." "I'm not thinking about money," Victoria said, and as she spoke the words, she realized they were true in a way that surprised her. "I'm thinking about fairness." For the next 2 hours, while Sofia slept peacefully and the storm continued its assault on the city, Victoria and Marcus went through every document in the custody file. She asked questions with the systematic thoroughness that had made her successful in business, but her motivation was entirely different from any corporate analysis she had ever conducted. The picture that emerged was both predictable and infuriating. Marcus's ex-wife Carmen had remarried a successful attorney named Derek Whitman, and together they lived in a suburban house with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. They could afford private schools, family vacations, college savings plans. Derek had convinced Carmen that Sofia deserved these advantages, and that Marcus's modest income and uncertain work schedule made him an inadequate provider. "Look at this," Victoria said, pointing to a section of Derek's custody petition. "He's arguing that your unstable employment situation creates an unsuitable environment for a child. But then he acknowledges that you've never missed a support payment and that Sofia has never lacked for any necessities." That's what I don't understand, Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. Sofia is happy, healthy, doing well in school. She has friends. She's confident. She knows she's loved. Isn't that what matters? Victoria studied a financial disclosure form that Derek had submitted as evidence of the stability his household could provide. The numbers were impressive. Combined income in the mid-six figures, substantial savings, real estate investments. But there was something cold about the way it was presented, as if love could be quantified in spreadsheet cells. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said. "What happened with your marriage to Carmen? Not the legal details, but what changed?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had spent years trying to understand how love could transform into something that felt like its opposite. "Carmen and I met in college. She was studying business, I was in engineering before I switched to construction management. We both came from families that didn't have much, and we talked about building something different. A life where work mattered but family came first." He glanced toward Sofia's sleeping form. "For a while, that's exactly what we had. But after Sofia was born, something shifted." Victoria waited, recognizing the careful way Marcus chose his words, the way he was trying to be fair to someone who was no longer being fair to him. "Carmen started working for a financial planning firm, and she was good at it, really good. She started making more money than we'd ever imagined having. And suddenly our little house felt too small. Our old car seemed embarrassing. She wanted things I couldn't afford to give her on a construction worker's salary." "Did you try to find different work?" "For a while, yeah. I looked into corporate jobs, management positions, with big construction companies. But they all required travel. 60-hour weeks. The kind of schedule that would have meant missing Sofia's first steps, her school plays, her bedtime stories." Marcus's voice grew quiet. "I couldn't do it. Maybe that makes me selfish, but I couldn't trade watching my daughter grow up for a bigger paycheck." Victoria thought about her own choices, the relationships she had sacrificed on the altar of professional achievement, the way she had convinced herself that success would eventually create space for personal fulfillment. "That doesn't make you selfish," she said. "That makes you a good father." Derek would disagree. He's never missed an opportunity to point out that real men provide financial security for their families, that love doesn't pay for college tuition or emergency medical bills. "And Carmen agrees with him?" Marcus's expression grew complicated. "I think Carmen is scared. Derek represents everything she never had growing up. Financial security, social status, the promise that she'll never have to worry about money again. He's very persuasive about what Sofia needs to succeed in life. Creating and narrating this type of story requires significant time and effort. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this." She thought about her own board meeting in just a few hours, where similar calculations would determine the fate of her company and the livelihoods of 800 employees. "Marcus, can I show you something?" She pulled up her laptop and opened her presentation for the morning's board meeting. "This is what I'm fighting tomorrow. A hostile takeover by an investment group that thinks they can run my company better by cutting costs and maximizing short-term profits." Marcus leaned closer to the screen, studying the financial charts and strategic analyses that represented Victoria's 15 years of work. "They want to buy your company even though you don't want to sell? They want to acquire enough stock to force a sale. They're telling my board members that emotional leadership, caring about employee welfare, maintaining company culture, prioritizing long-term sustainability over quarterly gains is bad for business." "Sounds familiar," Marcus said grimly. "The parallels are striking, aren't they? In both cases, we're being told that love and loyalty are luxuries we can't afford, that rational self-interest should override emotional connections." Victoria closed the laptop, thinking about different kinds of families, different ways of measuring worth. "But here's what I've learned in 15 years of business. Companies that treat people like numbers eventually fail, and families that prioritize finances over relationships eventually break apart." Sofia stirred in her sleep, making a soft murmuring sound that caused both adults to lower their voices instinctively. Mr. Peanuts had fallen to the floor, and Marcus gently retrieved the stuffed elephant, tucking it back under his daughter's arm with the practiced tenderness of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. "She's lucky to have you," Victoria said, watching the careful way Marcus adjusted Sofia's blanket. Am I doing the right thing? Marcus asked suddenly, his voice raw with doubt. Maybe Derek is right. Maybe I am being selfish, putting my own need to be with Sofia ahead of what would actually be best for her future. Victoria studied his profile in the dim light from the bedside lamp, seeing the genuine anguish of a parent who loved his child enough to question his own judgment. It was a humility she rarely encountered in her professional world, where confidence was often valued over wisdom. "Can I tell you about my childhood?" she said, surprising herself with the offer. She rarely discussed her personal history, having learned that vulnerability was often weaponized in business settings. Marcus nodded, settling back in his chair with the patient attention she had come to recognize as one of his defining qualities. "My parents were both doctors, very successful, very driven, very focused on achievement and status. We had the big house, the private schools, the college funds, all the markers of a successful family. But I barely knew them. I was raised by nannies and boarding schools, taught that emotional expression was weakness and that personal relationships were secondary to professional advancement." Victoria paused, thinking about the cost of that upbringing, the ways it had shaped her into someone who could run a company but struggled to maintain intimate relationships. "I became exactly what they wanted, successful, independent, financially secure. But I'm 42 years old, and I've never experienced the kind of unconditional love I can see between you and Sofia. I've never had someone look at me the way she looks at you when you're reading her bedtime stories." "Victoria, I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said quickly. "I'm telling you because Derek's vision of success, the financial security, the social status, the material advantages, that was my childhood, and it was empty in ways I'm only now beginning to understand." Marcus absorbed this information with the same thoughtful consideration he gave everything else, processing not just her words but the emotion behind them. "What would you have wanted instead?" "I would have wanted a parent who chose to be present over being impressive. I would have wanted bedtime stories and inside jokes, and someone who knew my fears and dreams better than my GPA and test scores." Victoria looked toward Sofia's peaceful face. "I would have wanted what she has with you." The storm outside seemed to be reaching its peak, with thunder that shook the building and lightning that turned the hotel room into a series of stark photographs. In the intermittent illumination, Victoria could see Marcus considering her words, weighing them against his own fears and doubts. "But what if Derek is right about the practical stuff?" Marcus asked. "What if Sofia grows up resenting me for limiting her opportunities? What if she needs things I can't provide?" "Then you'll figure it out together," Victoria said with conviction that surprised her. "You'll work extra jobs, apply for scholarships, find creative solutions, but you'll do it as a team, with honesty and communication and the absolute certainty that she's valued for who she is, not what she achieves." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. "I want to give you the name of someone who can help with the custody case. Margaret Chen. No relation, despite the name. She's a family law attorney who specializes in cases where financial disparity is being used as a weapon. She's expensive, but she's also brilliant at showing courts what really matters in child welfare cases." "Victoria, I can't afford." "I can," Victoria said simply. "Consider it an investment in proving that love is a better foundation for families than money." Marcus stared at her, and Victoria could see him struggling with pride and practicality, with the desire to handle his own problems and the reality of what was at stake. "I can't let you pay for my legal fees." "Why not?" "Because I barely know you, and this isn't your responsibility, and I don't take charity." Victoria set down her phone and looked at Marcus directly. "This isn't charity. This is me recognizing a fight that matters and choosing to be part of it. You said earlier that people helped your family when you needed it. People who had no obligation but chose to care anyway. Let me be one of those people." "But what do you get out of it?" Victoria considered the question seriously. What did she get out of helping this family? It wouldn't improve her quarterly earnings or strengthen her market position. It wouldn't impress her board members or advance her professional goals. But as she looked around the hotel room that had become an unexpected sanctuary, at the father and daughter who had welcomed her without question, she realized that some returns couldn't be measured in dollars. "I get to remember what I'm fighting for," she said finally. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk into a boardroom and argue that companies should value people over profits, that long-term relationships matter more than short-term gains. It's going to be a lot easier to make that argument authentically after spending tonight with people who actually live those values. Sofia made another soft sound in her sleep, and both adults automatically lowered their voices further. The intimacy of the moment struck Victoria. The way shared concern for a sleeping child created instant cooperation between strangers. The way love expressed itself in countless small considerations. "There's something else," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to know that if we do this, if we fight this custody case together, it won't be easy. Derek is going to use every resource at his disposal, and he's going to try to make you look unstable, unreliable, inadequate. He might even try to use your association with me against you." "How?" "Wealthy woman, single, no children of her own. He could spin it as inappropriate, could suggest that I have ulterior motives for helping you." Victoria had seen similar tactics used in business disputes, the way that legitimate partnerships could be twisted into something suspicious by clever lawyers. "I need you to be prepared for that." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing the potential costs against the current reality of fighting Derek's resources, with only his own determination and limited savings. "What do you think our chances are?" he asked finally. Victoria looked at Sofia sleeping peacefully with her well-loved elephant, at the custody papers that told a story of systems failing families, at Marcus's face in the dim light, exhausted but determined, worried but not defeated. "I think any judge who spends 5 minutes in a room with you and Sofia will see what I saw tonight," she said. "A father who has built his life around his daughter's well-being, and a little girl who is confident, articulate, and absolutely certain about where she belongs." Thunder crashed outside with renewed fury, and the hotel lights flickered ominously. In the brief darkness, Victoria felt the weight of what she was committing to. Not just financial support for a legal battle, but emotional investment in strangers who had somehow become important to her in the span of a few hours. When the lights steadied, Marcus was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked. "And don't tell me it's just about fairness or systems or remembering what you're fighting for. There's something else." Victoria felt her carefully constructed professional armor shifting, revealing vulnerabilities she had spent years learning to hide. "Because for the first time in a very long time, I'm in a room with people who chose love over convenience, and I want to be part of protecting that choice." She paused, thinking about her own battles, her own choices, the ways that success could become its own kind of prison. "And because tomorrow morning I'm going to argue that my company should remain independent, so we can continue treating employees like family instead of resources. It occurred to me tonight that I don't actually know what healthy families look like. But now I do." Marcus reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her manicured ones. "Thank you," he said simply. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside room 1247, something had shifted. Victoria looked at their joined hands, at Sofia sleeping peacefully, at the legal documents that no longer seemed insurmountable, and realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a reason to fight that had nothing to do with winning and everything to do with love. Victoria woke at 4:47 a.m. to the sound of Sofia whispering urgent Spanish to Mr. Peanuts, a conversation that seemed to involve detailed explanations about courtrooms and judges, and why elephants made excellent character witnesses. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind the peculiar silence that follows chaos, a stillness so complete it felt almost sacred. Marcus was already awake, sitting by the window with his phone and a cup of coffee that smelled like it had come from the lobby's perpetually brewing pot. He looked up when Victoria stirred, and she saw in his expression the particular exhaustion that comes from spending the night wrestling with problems that have no clear solutions. "How long have you been up?" she asked, checking her own phone to find 17 missed messages from Sarah and a text from her driver confirming that the highways were finally open. "About an hour. I called Margaret Chen, the lawyer you recommended. She can see us this afternoon if you're still willing to." "I'm still willing," Victoria said, cutting off his uncertainty before it could take root. "What did she say about the case?" Sofia had abandoned her conversation with Mr. Peanuts and was listening to the adults with the focused attention of someone whose life hung in the balance of grown-up decisions. Victoria noticed that the little girl had gotten dressed while the adults were sleeping. Fresh clothes, hair carefully braided, shoes tied in neat bows. It was the kind of self-sufficiency that children develop when they learn early that adult problems require adult solutions, even from 8-year-olds. "She said the timing is actually good," Marcus reported, his voice carrying a note of surprised hope. "Derek filed for emergency custody based on claims about my financial instability, but that means the court has to hold a hearing within 72 hours. If we can present evidence that his characterization is inaccurate, we can turn his aggressive timeline against him," Victoria finished, her mind already shifting into strategic mode. Instead of having months to build a case, he has to justify his emergency claims immediately. "Papa," Sofia said, climbing onto the bed beside Marcus with Mr. Peanuts tucked securely under one arm. "Does this mean I get to tell the judge that I want to stay with you?" Marcus smoothed his daughter's hair with the gentle precision of someone who had performed this morning ritual thousands of times. "We'll see, Mija. The important thing is that we're going to fight for what's right." Victoria's phone buzzed with another call from Sarah, and she knew she couldn't delay the conversation much longer. The board meeting was in 2.5 hours, and she needed to finalize her presentation, confirm her strategy, steel herself for a battle that would determine the future of everything she had built. "I need to take this," she said apologetically, "but first, Sofia, can I ask you something?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "If you had to explain to the judge why you want to live with your papa, what would you tell them?" Sofia considered the question with the seriousness of someone who understood that her words might shape her future. "I would tell them that Papa knows all my favorite stories, and he lets me help him build things, and when I have bad dreams, he sits with me until I feel safe again. And I would tell them that Derek doesn't like it when I'm loud, but Papa says being loud is just another way of being happy." Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. "Those are good reasons," she said quietly. "Also," Sofia added with 8-year-old logic, "Papa never makes me feel like I'm too much. Derek always looks tired when I talk, like I'm using up his patience. But Papa likes listening to me." Marcus's expression grew pained, and Victoria could see him processing the implications of his daughter's observations. The ways that Derek's dismissive behavior was already affecting Sofia's sense of self-worth, already teaching her to make herself smaller to accommodate adult impatience. Victoria stepped into the hallway to take Sarah's call, but as she listened to the update on overnight stock movements and board member sentiment, her mind kept drifting back to Sofia's words. "Papa never makes me feel like I'm too much." When was the last time Victoria had been in a relationship where she felt safe being her full self? Passionate, driven, occasionally overwhelming in her enthusiasm for projects and causes that mattered to her. "Victoria, are you listening?" Sarah's voice cut through her distraction. "Patterson is planning to make a motion to table your presentation and move directly to a vote on Meridian's offer. He thinks prolonging the discussion is just delaying the inevitable." "Patterson can think whatever he wants," Victoria said, her voice carrying an edge that made a passing hotel guest look at her with curiosity. "But he's going to listen to what I have to say before any votes are taken." "Has Richardson confirmed the 6 a.m. call?" "Yes, but Victoria, I have to tell you, the preliminary numbers from Meridian are impressive. They're offering a 30% premium over current market value, and they're guaranteeing retention for senior management." Victoria closed her eyes, thinking about guarantees that weren't worth the paper they were printed on, about senior managers who would survive while frontline employees got laid off in the name of efficiency. "Sarah, how long have you been working for me?" 4 years next month." "And in those 4 years, have I ever made a decision based solely on what looked good on a spreadsheet?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "No. But Victoria, this is different. This is your life's work we're talking about." "Exactly," Victoria said. "This is my life's work. Which means it's worth fighting for on my terms, not theirs." When she returned to the hotel room, Marcus and Sofia were engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about breakfast options and whether the hotel's continental spread included anything that could pass for actual nutrition. The domestic normalcy of it struck Victoria with unexpected force, the way that even in the midst of crisis, life continued with its small rituals and necessary concerns. "Everything okay with your business situation?" Marcus asked, and Victoria could hear the genuine concern in his voice, the way he had absorbed her problems into his own emotional landscape despite having known her for less than 12 hours. "It will be," she said, settling back into her chair. "Can I ask you both something? What does home mean to you? Sofia looked up from her negotiations with Mr. Peanuts about sharing breakfast space. Home is where you belong, she said simply. Where people are happy when you walk in the room. Marcus nodded slowly. Home is where you don't have to pretend to be anything other than who you are. Victoria thought about her own spaces. The executive apartment with its minimalist decor and city views, the corner office with its awards and accolades, the boardrooms where she performed the role of successful CEO with increasingly practiced precision. When was the last time she had been anywhere that felt like home in the way Marcus and Sofia described it? I need to ask you both to trust me today, she said suddenly. I have to go handle my business crisis, but I want you to meet with Margaret Chen, and I want you to let her represent you, and I want you to not worry about the cost. Victoria, Marcus began, but she held up a hand. Here's the thing, she continued. I've spent 15 years building a company based on the principle that people matter more than profits, that long-term relationships are more valuable than short-term gains. But until last night, those were just business philosophies. They weren't personal truths. She looked around the hotel room that had become a temporary sanctuary, at the father and daughter who had shown her what it looked like when values were lived, rather than just proclaimed. You two taught me something about what I'm really fighting for. Let me return the favor. Sofia had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention of someone who was learning to read the emotional subtext of adult conversations. Victoria, are you scared about your meeting? The question was so direct, so innocent in its curiosity, that Victoria found herself answering with more honesty than she had intended. Yes, sweetheart, I'm terrified. I built something I love, and now people who don't understand what makes it special want to take it apart and sell the pieces. Like what Derek wants to do to our family, Sofia asked, and the parallel was so clear, so precisely stated that both adults fell silent. Exactly like that, Victoria said finally. Marcus reached across the space between them and took Victoria's hand again, the gesture now familiar enough to feel like a promise. Then we fight for each other, he said simply. You help us keep our family together, and we help you remember what you're fighting to protect. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation and logistics. Victoria confirmed her calls with Richardson and Patterson, reviewed her presentation materials one final time, and arranged for a car service that would get her back to Seattle in time for the board meeting. Marcus called Margaret Chen's office to confirm their afternoon appointment and began organizing the documentation they would need for their case. Through it all, Sofia moved between the adults with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to be helpful during family crises, offering encouragement, asking thoughtful questions, and generally serving as an anchor of hope in a room full of anxiety. At 6 a.m. sharp, Victoria's phone rang with Richardson's call. She stepped into the bathroom for privacy, but not before catching Sofia's whispered advice to Mr. Peanuts. Sometimes grown-ups need extra courage, so we have to be brave enough for everyone. Richardson's voice carried the careful neutrality of a board member who was trying to balance loyalty to Victoria with fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Victoria, I want you to know that this isn't personal. But Meridian's offer is substantial, and their track record with acquisitions is solid. Their track record involves gutting companies and selling off the assets. Victoria replied, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. They acquire, they eliminate redundancies, which means people, and they maximize short-term returns at the expense of long-term sustainability. But their financial projections show. David, Victoria interrupted, using Richardson's first name with deliberate familiarity. Do you remember why you joined our board 5 years ago? You said you wanted to be part of something that proved business could be both profitable and principled. Richardson was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could almost hear him weighing financial calculations against philosophical commitments. I remember. But Victoria, we have to be realistic about market pressures. I am being realistic. I am being realistic about what happens to companies that sacrifice their values for stock prices. They become indistinguishable from their competitors, they lose their best employees, and they eventually fail because they have nothing unique to offer. Victoria walked to the bathroom mirror, looking at her reflection as she made the argument that would determine her professional future. But instead of seeing the polished CEO who usually stared back at her, she saw someone who had spent the night learning what it meant to fight for something more important than success. David, I need you to give me 2 hours. Let me make my presentation. Let me show the board what we're really choosing between. If you still think Meridian's offer is better for our stakeholders, after hearing what I have to say, I'll respect that decision." Richardson agreed, but Victoria could hear the reluctance in his voice, the way he was already constructing the argument for why accepting the takeover bid was the responsible choice. She ended the call and immediately dialed Patterson, bracing herself for a more adversarial conversation. Patterson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Victoria, I hope you're calling to tell me you've reconsidered this quixotic crusade against a very reasonable offer. I'm calling to tell you that I'm going to fight for what we built, and I'm going to ask the board to remember why we built it." Victoria kept her voice steady, professional, but there was steel underneath the courtesy. "Bill, you've been with this company since the beginning. You know what makes us different. What makes us different is becoming a liability in the current market environment. Meridian can offer our employees better benefits, more job security, opportunities for advancement within a larger organization." Victoria thought about Sofia's words. "Papa never makes me feel like I'm too much," and realized that Patterson was essentially arguing that her company would be better off under parents who valued different things, who measured success by different metrics. "Bill, can I ask you something? When you look at our employee retention rates, our client satisfaction scores, our innovation metrics, when you see that we consistently outperform our competitors on every measure except short-term profitability, what do you think that means?" "I think it means we're leaving money on the table. I think it means we're building something sustainable." Victoria sat down on the edge of the hotel bathtub, realizing that she was having this crucial conversation in a bathroom, while a father and daughter waited in the next room to learn whether a stranger would keep her promise to help them fight their own battle against people who confused financial resources with moral authority. "Victoria, I've known you for 15 years and I respect what you've accomplished. But sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let someone else provide better opportunities for their child." The parallel was so precise, so clearly intentional, that Victoria knew Patterson had been discussing her situation with Meridian's representatives, had been coached on how to frame the takeover as an act of benevolence rather than acquisition. It was the same strategy Derek was using against Marcus, the suggestion that true love required stepping aside for someone with better resources. "Bill, I'll see you at the board meeting," Victoria said, ending the call before he could continue his carefully rehearsed arguments. When she returned to the main room, Marcus and Sofia were sitting together on one of the beds, reviewing a list of questions that Margaret Chen had emailed for them to consider before their meeting. Victoria sat down across from them, feeling the weight of the morning's conversations, the parallel battles they were all facing. "How did it go?" Marcus asked. "Like I expected. They're convinced that money trumps everything else." Victoria looked at Sofia, who was listening with the focused attention of someone who understood that adult decisions had consequences for children. "But I learned something important from you two." "What?" Sofia asked. "I learned that sometimes the most important fights are the ones where you're not fighting against someone, but fighting for something. I'm not fighting against Meridian because I dislike them. I'm fighting for the company we built, for the employees who trust us, for the principles that make us different." Marcus nodded slowly. "Like we're not fighting against Derek because we think he's a bad person. We're fighting for Sofia's right to stay with the parent who knows her best." "Exactly." Victoria checked the time on her phone, 6:45 a.m., which meant she needed to leave for Seattle within the next few minutes if she wanted to arrive in time for final preparations. "Are you ready for this?" "Are you?" Marcus asked, and the question carried layers of meaning that went beyond their individual battles. Victoria thought about the presentation she was about to give, about the board members who would decide her company's fate, about the father and daughter who had trusted her with their story and their hope. She thought about different ways of measuring success, different definitions of victory, different kinds of families worth fighting for. "I'm ready," she said, and for the first time in months, she meant it completely. Sofia jumped up from the bed and hugged Victoria with the fierce affection of someone who had decided that emotional investment was worth the risk of disappointment. "You're going to do great," she said with 8-year-old certainty. "And we're going to win our fight too, because we have you on our team now." As Victoria hugged the little girl back, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of hotel soap, she realized that Sofia was right. They did have each other now, this unlikely trio of people fighting parallel battles against systems that valued resources over relationships, money over love, efficiency over humanity. And for the first time in her professional life, Victoria was walking into a boardroom not to prove her worth to people who might never understand what she had built, but to defend something precious that she had finally learned to recognize and name. The emergency board meeting convened in the 32nd floor conference room at exactly 7 a.m., with downtown Seattle spreading below them like a circuit board of ambition and aspiration. Victoria sat at the head of the polished table, her presentation materials arranged with military precision, facing 8 board members whose expressions ranged from sympathetic to skeptical to openly hostile. Patterson had arrived 15 minutes early, armed with Meridian's revised offer and what appeared to be a carefully prepared argument for why accepting it represented fiduciary responsibility rather than capitulation. Richardson sat 2 seats to Victoria's left, studiously avoiding eye contact while reviewing financial projections on his tablet. The other board members, Morrison, Walsh, Chen, Patel, Brooks, and DeVries, had taken their seats with the grim efficiency of people who understood that the next 2 hours would determine not just the company's future, but their own legacies as stewards of something that had started as a dream and grown into a family of 800 employees. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Sofia says to tell you that Mr. Peanuts is sending extra courage your way. Margaret Chen is brilliant, by the way. We're in good hands." The message studied something in Victoria's chest, reminding her that this battle was not just about her own vision or ego, but about proving that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built her credibility through 15 years of consistent results. "Before we discuss Meridian's offer, I want to remind you of what we're actually considering selling." She clicked through to her first slide, which showed not financial projections or market analyses, but a collection of employee photos from the previous year's company retreat, people laughing, collaborating, celebrating achievements that went beyond quarterly targets. 15 years ago, we started this company with a radical proposition that businesses could be both profitable and humane, that treating employees like family would create better outcomes for everyone involved. The results speak for themselves. Victoria advanced through slides showing employee retention rates that were the envy of their industry, client satisfaction scores that consistently topped competitor benchmarks, innovation metrics that demonstrated the kind of creative problem-solving that emerged when people felt secure enough to take risks. Meridian's offer is based on the assumption that we can maintain these results while fundamentally changing how we operate, cutting benefits, eliminating redundancies, maximizing short-term returns at the expense of the culture that created our success. Patterson cleared his throat pointedly. "Victoria, no one disputes that you've built something impressive, but we have to consider market realities. Meridian's track record with acquisitions shows consistent improvement in profitability." "Consistent improvement in profitability. Consistent degradation in everything else that makes companies worth working for," Victoria replied. She clicked to a slide showing Meridian's previous acquisitions, companies that had been stripped of their distinctive cultures and reduced to generic profit centers within 18 months of purchase. Morrison, who had been quiet during the preliminary discussions, leaned forward with interest. "What's your counterproposal, Victoria? How do we compete with a 30% premium over market value?" This was the moment Victoria had been preparing for, the argument that would determine whether her company remained independent or became another asset in Meridian's portfolio. But instead of launching into the financial projections and strategic analyses her board expected, she found herself thinking about Sofia's custody hearing, about the ways that love could be quantified and dismissed by systems that only understood certain kinds of value. "My counterproposal is that we remember why we're here," she said, setting aside her prepared remarks and speaking directly to people she had worked with for years, people who had believed in her vision when it was nothing more than hope and determination. "Jennifer," she said, looking at Walsh, who had been the company's first major client, "do you remember why you chose to work with us instead of the 3 larger firms that bid on your project?" Walsh shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting to be called on directly. "You were the only company that took time to understand what we were actually trying to accomplish, instead of just proposing what you thought we wanted to hear." "Exactly. We listened, we cared, we treated your problems like they mattered, not like they were obstacles to our profitability." Victoria turned to Chen, who served on the board despite sharing no relation with her. "David, you joined our board because you said you wanted to prove that Asian American businesses could succeed without compromising their values. What values do you think Meridian prioritizes? Chen looked down at his notes, and Victoria could see him wrestling with the same tension Richardson had expressed earlier, the conflict between philosophical commitment and financial pragmatism. Victoria, I believe in what we've built, but I also have a responsibility to ensure that our stakeholders get the best possible return on their investment. And what kind of return are we talking about? Victoria clicked to a new slide showing long-term performance metrics. Over the past 5 years, our stock has outperformed the market by 18%. Our employee retention has saved us millions in recruitment and training costs. Our client satisfaction ratings have generated referral business worth more than our entire marketing budget. She paused, looking around the table at faces that reflected various degrees of conviction and doubt. Meridian's offer looks attractive because it front-loads returns. They're betting that they can extract maximum value quickly, before market conditions change or competitive pressures intensify. But we're not a short-term play. We're a sustainable business built on relationships that have taken years to develop. Patterson was shaking his head before Victoria finished speaking. Victoria, you're asking us to turn down a guaranteed 30% return in favor of hypothetical future performance. That's not responsible stewardship. I'm asking you to remember that we're stewards of more than just shareholder value, Victoria replied. We're stewards of people's livelihoods, of a company culture that has created opportunities for employees to thrive professionally and personally. Her phone buzzed with another message, and she glanced at it reflexively. Margaret says Sofia's testimony this afternoon was incredible. The judge asked Derek's lawyers some very pointed questions about their evidence. We think we have a real chance. The news sent a surge of energy through Victoria's chest, reminding her that some battles were worth fighting not because victory was guaranteed, but because the stakes were too important to surrender without a fight. Let me ask you all something, Victoria said, pocketing her phone and focusing completely on the people around the table. How many of you have children? 6 hands rose around the table, and Victoria could see puzzlement in their expressions at the apparent change of subject. And how many of you would accept an offer to sell your children to people who promised they could provide better financial opportunities, better material advantages, better access to resources that might improve their life outcomes? The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of Seattle traffic 32 floors below. That's not a fair comparison, Patterson said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Isn't it? Victoria asked. We built this company like a family. We hired people not just for their skills, but for their potential. We invested in their growth, celebrated their successes, supported them through personal challenges. We created something that has meaning beyond its market valuation. She clicked to a slide showing employee testimonials from their most recent culture survey. Quotes about professional development opportunities, work-life balance, the sense of purpose that came from being part of something larger than individual ambition. Sarah Martinez started as a receptionist 7 years ago. We paid for her night school, mentored her through management training, and now she's running our client services division. Meridian's efficiency analysis would have identified her as redundant overhead within 6 months of acquisition. Brooks, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Victoria, no one disputes that we've created something special. But special doesn't always translate to sustainable in competitive markets. Doesn't it? Victoria pulled up financial projections showing their company's performance against industry benchmarks over the past decade. We've weathered 3 market downturns, 2 major client defections, and countless competitive challenges. We've done it because our employees are invested in outcomes, not just paychecks. Because our clients trust us to prioritize their success over our short-term profits. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she read the message aloud. The judge ruled in Marcus's favor. Sofia gets to stay with her father. The board members looked at Victoria with confusion, clearly wondering why she was sharing personal news during their crucial deliberations. I spent last night with a single father who was fighting a custody battle against his ex-wife's new husband, a lawyer who argued that financial resources were more important than emotional connection, that a child would be better off with parents who could provide material advantages, rather than the father who actually knew her dreams and fears and bedtime stories. Victoria closed her laptop and looked around the table at people who had known her for years but were seeing a different side of her leadership for the first time. The judge saw through the financial arguments to what actually mattered, where the child was happiest, healthiest, most authentically herself. I'm asking you to make the same kind of decision about our company. Richardson shifted in his chair, and Victoria could see something changing in his expression, a recognition that transcended the spreadsheets and market analyses that had dominated their discussions. What guarantee do we have that our culture will survive long-term market pressures, he asked. What happens if we turn down Meridian's offer and then face even more aggressive competition from companies that have accepted these kinds of acquisitions? We do what we've always done, Victoria said. We adapt, we innovate, we find ways to compete that leverage our strengths rather than abandoning them. We trust that treating people well creates better outcomes for everyone. Morrison pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. I want to see the employee retention data broken down by department and seniority level. If we're making this decision based on cultural values, I want to understand exactly what those values have produced in measurable terms. For the next 30 minutes, the board worked through data with the intensity of people who understood that they were making a decision that couldn't be undone. Victoria found herself defending not just financial projections but philosophical commitments, explaining how their approach to employee development had created competitive advantages that couldn't be easily replicated. Patterson remained skeptical, pressing for guarantees that Victoria couldn't provide, insisting that fiduciary responsibility required accepting the most lucrative offer available. But other board members began asking different kinds of questions about employee satisfaction, client loyalty, the intangible assets that made their company distinctive in an increasingly commoditized market. At 8:47 a.m., Walsh called for a 15-minute recess, and the board members scattered to make phone calls and review materials privately. Victoria stepped into the hallway, exhausted but oddly exhilarated by the intensity of defending something she had built with her own hands and heart. Her phone rang with Marcus's number, and she answered immediately. We won, he said, and she could hear Sofia cheering in the background. The judge said that financial resources don't determine fitness for parenting, and that Sofia's preference to remain with me was a significant factor in the decision. Marcus, that's wonderful, Victoria said, feeling tears threaten for reasons she couldn't entirely explain. How is Sofia handling it? See for yourself, Marcus said, and then Sofia's voice came on the line. Victoria, we won! And Margaret Chen said you were the best surprise witness ever, even though you weren't actually there. She said your financial support showed the judge that smart people believed in Papa. Victoria pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the conference room window, looking down at the city where people were beginning their ordinary Thursday morning routines, unaware that in boardrooms and courtrooms across the metropolitan area, battles were being fought that would determine the shape of families and companies for years to come. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You were very brave. Are you winning your fight too? Sofia asked with characteristic directness. Victoria looked through the glass at her board members, who were having intense conversations in small clusters, weighing financial calculations against philosophical commitments, trying to balance responsibility to shareholders with loyalty to principles that had guided their decisions for 15 years. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I know I'm fighting for the right reasons. When the board reconvened, the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. Patterson still appeared determined to push for acceptance of Meridian's offer, but other members seemed more engaged with questions about long-term strategy than short-term returns. Victoria Chen said as everyone settled back into their seats, I've been thinking about what you said earlier about stewardship extending beyond shareholder value. Can you walk us through exactly what you think we'd be giving up if we accept Meridian's acquisition? Victoria pulled up a new slide showing organizational charts, not the formal reporting structures that appeared in corporate documents, but the informal networks of mentorship, collaboration, and support that had evolved over years of working together toward shared goals. We'd be giving up the relationships that make innovation possible, she said. The trust between departments that allows us to take risks on experimental projects, the institutional memory that helps us avoid repeating past mistakes, the sense of ownership that makes employees willing to work late not because they have to, but because they believe in what we're building. Brooks leaned forward with interest. How do you quantify those intangibles when we're competing against companies that have accepted acquisition offers and used the capital infusion to undercut our pricing? We don't compete on price, Victoria said. We compete on value. We deliver solutions that work because we understand our clients' businesses well enough to anticipate their needs. We innovate because our employees feel safe suggesting ideas that might fail. We retain clients because they trust us to prioritize their success over our profit margins. Richardson had been reviewing financial projections on his tablet, but now he looked up with something that might have been renewed conviction. Victoria, if we reject Meridian's offer, what's your strategy for maintaining our competitive position? What's your plan for growth that doesn't compromise the values you're asking us to protect? Victoria felt the weight of 15 years of decision-making experience settle on her shoulders, the accumulated wisdom of building something from nothing, of learning to trust her instincts even when conventional business wisdom suggested different approaches. We double down on what makes us different, she said. We invest in employee development, client relationships, technological innovation that serves human needs, rather than replacing human judgment. We prove that sustainable business practices create better long-term outcomes than short-term profit maximization. The vote, when it finally came at 9:23 a.m., was closer than Victoria had expected but decisive enough to provide clear direction. 5 board members voted to reject Meridian's acquisition offer and continue as an independent company. 3 voted to accept the offer, with Patterson arguing until the final moment that they were choosing idealism over realism. As the meeting concluded and board members began gathering their materials, Morrison approached Victoria with an expression that mixed relief with determination. "You know this means we have to prove everything you just promised," she said. "We have to show that values-based leadership actually produces better outcomes, not just better feelings." Victoria nodded, thinking about Marcus and Sofia, about the judge who had seen through financial arguments to recognize what actually mattered for a child's well-being. "I know. But I'd rather fail trying to build something meaningful than succeed at creating something generic." Her phone buzzed with a text from Sofia. "Papa says we're taking you to dinner to celebrate both our victories. Mr. Peanuts wants to know if you like pizza." As Victoria rode the elevator down from the 32nd floor, she realized that she had learned something important about success, that the most meaningful victories were the ones that preserved space for love to flourish, whether in families or companies or the communities that formed when people chose to value each other's humanity over their productive capacity. Sofia Rivera Chen sat in the passenger seat of Victoria's Tesla, her legs swinging as she explained to Mr. Peanuts why it was important to dress professionally for Take Your Daughter to Work Day, even if you were a stuffed elephant. The formal adoption papers had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, making Victoria Sofia's legal guardian in addition to Marcus's business partner in the construction consulting firm they had launched together. "Remember," Sofia instructed her elephant companion, "when we get to Victoria's office, you have to be very good during the board meeting. No trumpeting sounds when people say boring things." Marcus laughed from the back seat, where he was reviewing blueprints for the affordable housing project that had become their company's flagship development. "I think Mr. Peanuts has better board meeting behavior than most adults." Victoria glanced in the rearview mirror, still amazed by how naturally this unusual family configuration had evolved. The media had made much of the CEO who had gained a family while fighting a corporate takeover, but the reality was simpler and more complex than any business magazine profile could capture. 3 people who had found in each other what they hadn't known they were missing. "How are you feeling about the presentation?" Marcus asked, noting the way Victoria's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as they approached downtown Seattle. "Confident," Victoria said, and she meant it. "The numbers are solid, employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and we just landed the Morrison account that everyone said was impossible." The Morrison account had been Meridian's white whale, a tech giant that had been courted by every major consulting firm in the Pacific Northwest. Victoria's company had won the contract not through aggressive pricing or flashy presentations, but through a proposal that demonstrated deep understanding of Morrison's organizational culture and long-term strategic goals. "Plus," Sofia added with 8-year-old logic, "you have us for good luck now." Margaret Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Washington Law School, delivering the keynote address for the Family Law Symposium that had become an annual event since her successful defense of Marcus Rivera's custody rights. The case had set important precedents about economic bias and child welfare determinations, but Margaret knew the real victory lay in the family that continued to thrive in defiance of conventional expectations. "The Rivera case taught me something crucial about advocacy," She told the audience of law students and practicing attorneys. Sometimes our job isn't just to win cases, but to protect spaces where love can flourish in forms that don't fit traditional templates. In the audience, Marcus and Victoria sat with Sofia between them, the 9-year-old taking careful notes in a composition book for a school project about careers she might want to pursue. The previous year, she had announced her intention to become either a lawyer like Margaret or a CEO like Victoria, but more recently, she had expressed interest in architecture after spending weekends helping Marcus design accessible housing for senior citizens. The most important precedent we set, Margaret continued, was the recognition that family stability isn't measured in bank statements, but in the quality of relationships that nurture children's emotional, intellectual, and moral development. The Rivera Chen Foundation occupied the top floor of the building that housed their construction and consulting businesses, with windows that offered panoramic views of Seattle's evolving skyline. Sofia, now 13 and possessed of her father's practical wisdom and Victoria's strategic mind, spent her afternoons after school working on foundation projects that ranged from scholarship programs for children in non-traditional family situations to professional development initiatives for small business owners who prioritized values over profit margins. Papa, Sofia called from her desk in the foundation's main workspace. The Portland Housing Cooperative wants to know if we can help them design a community space that works for families with different structures. Marcus looked up from the architectural plans he was reviewing, designs for a mixed-income development that would provide both market-rate and subsidized housing in the same buildings, eliminating the economic segregation that characterized most affordable housing projects. "What kind of different structures?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Single parents, grandparents raising grandchildren, chosen families that aren't related by blood or marriage." Sofia had inherited Victoria's gift for cutting through complexity to identify essential issues. "Basically, families like ours." Victoria emerged from her office, having finished a video conference with the board of directors who continued to support their hybrid business model despite periodic pressure from investors who preferred more conventional approaches to profit maximization. "How did the Portland call go?" Marcus asked, noting the satisfied expression on Victoria's face. "They want to partner with us on 3 new developments over the next 5 years. Apparently, word is spreading that we actually know how to build communities instead of just housing units." The Rivera Chen approach to development had gained national attention not for its architectural innovation, but for its emphasis on creating spaces where different kinds of families could thrive together. Their projects included community kitchens for single parents, intergenerational programs that connected elderly residents with young families, and business incubators for entrepreneurs who shared their values about sustainable, community-focused enterprise. Derek Whitman sat in his law office, reviewing case files with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had built professional success on procedural expertise rather than passionate advocacy. The irony was not lost on him that his most high-profile loss, the Rivera custody case, had launched his career in a direction he had never intended, specializing in family law cases that involved non-traditional family structures. His marriage to Carmen had ended 2 years earlier, dissolved by the same economic pressures that had once seemed like their greatest advantage. Carmen's business had struggled during a market downturn, and Derek's inability to handle financial uncertainty had created tensions that neither of them had been equipped to resolve. He pulled up a news article about the Rivera Chen Foundation's latest initiative, a national program that provided legal and financial support for families facing custody challenges based on economic disparity. The program was funded by Victoria's consulting business and administered by Margaret Chen's expanded practice, with Marcus serving as a community liaison who helped families navigate the practical aspects of building stable homes on modest incomes. Derek had never apologized for his role in trying to separate Sofia from her father, but he had quietly donated to the foundation every year since its inception, his checks signed with the careful precision of someone seeking redemption through incremental acts of conscience. Sofia Rivera Chen graduated from Stanford Law School on a sunny May afternoon, with Marcus and Victoria cheering from the audience along with Margaret Chen, Sarah Martinez, and a collection of friends and colleagues who had become family over the years. At 23, Sofia possessed a rare combination of idealistic vision and practical experience, having spent her teenage years working in the family businesses and foundation programs that had shaped her understanding of how systems could be changed from within. Her graduation speech, delivered as class valedicant, focused on the intersection of law and social justice, the ways that legal advocacy could protect families and communities that didn't conform to traditional expectations. 15 years ago, Sofia told her classmates and their families, a single father almost lost custody of his daughter because a judge was asked to believe that financial resources were more important than emotional connection. Today, that daughter is graduating from law school, preparing to spend her career ensuring that other families have the legal support they need to stay together. In the audience, Marcus wiped away tears as he watched his daughter articulate the values that had guided their family's choices since that stormy night in a Portland hotel room. Beside him, Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had learned that the most important business deals were the ones that created families, rather than just profit margins. The hotel room at the Portland Marriott had been converted into a memorial suite, with plaques explaining its significance in the history of family law reform and community-focused business development. Visitors could read about the night when a CEO, a single father, and his 8-year-old daughter had found each other during a storm and decided to fight together for the kinds of values that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. Victoria, now in her early 60s and serving as chairwoman emeritus of her consulting firm, brought groups of business students through the memorial suite as part of her lectures on values-based leadership. The room looked exactly as it had that February night 20 years earlier, down to the twin beds and the small table by the window, where 3 strangers had planned strategies for battles that would reshape their understanding of success. The most important lesson from that night, Victoria would tell her students, wasn't about business strategy or legal tactics. It was about recognizing that some things are worth fighting for, not because you're guaranteed to win, but because losing them would mean losing part of what makes us human. Sofia, now a successful family law attorney and advocate for custody reform, had married her law school sweetheart and was raising 2 children with the same combination of love and practical wisdom that had characterized her own upbringing. She brought her own children to the memorial suite occasionally, telling them stories about their grandfather Marcus and grandmother Victoria, about the stuffed elephant named Mr. Peanuts who had witnessed the beginning of their unconventional family. Marcus Rivera celebrated his 70th birthday at the Victoria Chen Community Center, surrounded by families from the dozens of housing developments he had designed over the past quarter century. At 70, he moved more slowly than he had during his construction days, but his eyes still held the gentle strength that had convinced a stressed CEO to trust a stranger's offer of help during a winter storm. The community center bore his name, but Marcus insisted that its true legacy belonged to the children and families who had found stability and hope within its programs. The center offered everything from legal aid clinics to business development workshops to childcare services that recognized the realities of non-traditional work schedules and family structures. Victoria, now 72 and officially retired from day-to-day business operations, spent her time mentoring young entrepreneurs and writing a book about building companies that served human needs rather than just generating shareholder returns. Her hair had gone completely silver, and she moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to measure time in relationships rather than achievements. Sofia's children, Marcus Miguel, age 15, and Victoria Elena, age 12, had grown up hearing stories about the night their family began, about the importance of helping strangers and fighting for principles that couldn't be reduced to financial calculations. The birthday celebration included presentations from families who had been housed in Victoria Chen developments, business owners who had received foundation support, and former employees of Victoria's consulting firm who had gone on to start their own values-based enterprises. But the moment that moved Marcus most deeply came when his grandson stood up to offer a toast. "My grandfather taught me that home isn't a place," Miguel said, his voice carrying echoes of Marcus's gentle authority. "It's what happens when people choose to love each other completely, without conditions, without expecting anything in return except the chance to love back." The documentary about the Victoria Chen family premiered at the Sundance Film Festival on a snowy January evening, 3 decades after the hotel room encounter that had started their story. The film, directed by an independent filmmaker who had grown up in one of their housing developments, wove together archival footage, interviews, and dramatic recreations to tell the story of how 3 strangers had found each other during a storm and built something that outlasted their individual lives. Victoria, now 82 and using a walker but still possessed of the sharp intelligence that had made her a formidable CEO, attended the premiere with Sofia and her grandchildren. Marcus had passed away 2 years earlier, peacefully in his sleep after a life that had touched thousands of families through his work and advocacy. The film's final scene showed the original hotel room, preserved as it had been that February night, with Mr. Peanuts sitting on one of the beds as a testament to the power of childhood wisdom and the enduring strength of love that chooses to act despite uncertainty. In the closing credits, a quote from Sofia's law school graduation speech scrolled across the screen. Family isn't defined by blood or marriage or economic status. Family is what happens when people decide that someone else's well-being is as important as their own, and then spend their lives proving that decision through daily acts of care and courage. Miguel Rivera Chen, now 55 and serving his second term as mayor of Seattle, stood in the same hotel suite where his grandfather had met the woman who would become his grandmother. The room had been preserved as a historical landmark, visited by thousands of people each year who came to learn about the intersection of business ethics, family law reform, and community development that had emerged from one stormy night. Miguel's own children, twin daughters who carried on the family tradition of mixing idealistic vision with practical action, were studying the plaques and photographs that documented their family's history. At 15, they were already volunteering with the foundation programs that their great-grandmother Victoria had established decades earlier. "Tell us again about the elephant," Elena requested, pointing to the display case that held the original Mr. Peanuts, now worn smooth by decades of being loved by multiple generations of children. "Yeah," Miguel smiled, settling into the chair that had been marked with a small plaque indicating where Victoria had sat during that crucial night. "Mr. Peanuts belonged to your great-aunt Sofia when she was 8 years old. She used him to teach grown-ups about courage, how sometimes you have to be brave enough to help strangers, even when you don't know how the story will end." Through the hotel room window, the lights of Seattle spread out like promises made and kept, like a community built on the radical proposition that success could be measured in human flourishing rather than just financial accumulation. The city bore the marks of 4 decades of Rivera Chen influence. Affordable housing developments that had become vibrant neighborhoods, businesses that prioritized employee well-being alongside profit margins, legal reforms that protected families in all their diverse configurations. "The most important thing to understand about that night," Miguel continued, looking at his daughters with the same gentle attention that Marcus had once given to Sofia, "is that none of them knew they were starting something that would last for generations. They just knew that someone needed help, and they decided to provide it." As the sun set over Elliott Bay, casting long shadows through the memorial suite, 3 generations of the Rivera Chen family sat together in the space where their story had begun, surrounded by the evidence of how love, when backed by courage and sustained by commitment, could reshape the world in ways that no amount of money or status could achieve. Victoria Elena Rivera Chen, now 62 and carrying her great-great-grandmother's name along with her legacy of principled leadership, stood before the United Nations General Assembly to deliver a keynote address on sustainable community development. Behind her, a projection showed images from the Rivera Chen Model Communities program, which had been replicated in 47 countries over the past 5 decades. The program's success lay not in its architectural innovation or economic efficiency, but in its recognition that human beings thrived when they lived in communities that valued relationship over productivity, cooperation over competition, long-term sustainability over short-term profit. 50 years ago, Victoria Elena told the assembled delegates, "My great-great-grandmother made a choice to help strangers during a winter storm." That single decision created a ripple effect that has touched millions of lives, not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it was kind. In the audience, representatives from dozens of nations listened to proposals for community development programs based on the Rivera Chen model, housing that accommodated diverse family structures, businesses that prioritized employee well-being, legal frameworks that protected communities against purely profit-driven development. The original Mr. Peanuts, now 78 years old and preserved in a climate-controlled case, traveled with Victoria Elena as a reminder that the most profound changes often began with the wisdom of children and the courage of adults who chose to listen. As Victoria Elena concluded her address, she held up a photograph of the original hotel room where her family's story had begun. "We are all just strangers helping strangers," she said, her voice carrying across the vast assembly hall. "But when we choose to see each other's humanity, when we decide that love is more important than profit, when we build communities that nurture rather than exploit, that's when we create the kind of world our children deserve to inherit." The standing ovation that followed lasted for 11 minutes, but the real measure of success would come in the years that followed, as communities around the world implemented programs based on the simple proposition that people mattered more than systems, that relationships were more valuable than resources, that the most important victories were the ones that created space for different kinds of families to flourish. That February night in Portland, the Rivera Chen Institute for Family and Community Studies occupied a complex of buildings where the original Marriott Hotel had once stood. The institute trained lawyers, urban planners, business leaders, and social workers in approaches that prioritized human flourishing over economic efficiency. The original hotel room had been relocated to the institute's main building, where it served as both museum and meditation space. Visitors came from around the world to sit in the chairs where Victoria, Marcus, and Sofia had planned their battles against systems that reduced love to economic calculations. A plaque by the door read, "In memory of 3 strangers who became family, and in celebration of all the families they helped create, love is the only investment that pays dividends across generations." Mr. Peanuts, now preserved through advanced conservation techniques, still sat on one of the beds, a testament to the enduring power of childhood wisdom and the courage of adults who chose to fight for what mattered most. The Institute's motto, carved in stone above the main entrance, came from Sofia's words during her custody hearing 50 years earlier: "Home is where people are happy when you walk in the room." And in communities around the world, in housing developments and businesses and families that had been shaped by the principles that began in a hotel room during a winter storm, people continued to choose each other, continued to fight for love over convenience, and continued to prove that some things were worth more than money. Creating and narrating this type of story requires significant time and effort. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.